Please be seated. The court is back in session, and Judge Lavenge will continue putting further questions to the expert. And Judge Lavenge, you have the floor.
Oui, merci.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I'll try to ask shorter questions to the expert. Mrs. Becker, when you visited Cambodia in December 1978, did you notice anything particular regarding pagodas and the practice of Buddhism?
Yes, the pagodas were empty. I saw more than a few that were used as granaries. And when I asked about it, Tuan Prasin in particular said it was a reactionary faith and the people had given it up. I didn't see anything that would suggest that there were any monks allowed. I didn't see a single monk. I didn't see any example of worship or the ability to worship.
Est-ce que vous avez posé des questions sur...
Did you ask any questions regarding the changes that had been entailed by the revolution in family relations between men and women, marriage, and so on and so forth?
Yes, and usually I asked every co-op I went to, and of course to Prasit and the other officials, essentially they acknowledged that children were taken away from, children were no longer living with their families by and large. They were sent on they called children's brigade. And at one point I saw a row of very young children gathering firewood, and that was called the children's brigade. Other times you'd see a truckload of what looked like sort of preteens, teenagers, and by gender, they would be either young girls or boys, and they would be in brigades. So that would be children. In terms of married couples, again, every once in a while in co-op, in the co-ops you would see couples, but in the cities they were by dormitories, men and women, so they were segregated. They said that you had to have permission to get married, and they wanted older, I can't remember the age, but sort of 20-ish. But I did not, except for in the model co-ops, I didn't see family groupings. And there was no disguising that it was by and large discouraged, so that there would be, working. As they kept saying, work is their major resource.
Est-ce que dans vos contacts avec...
In your contacts with cadres and the officials of Democratic Cambodia, did they express any concerns about increasing the population of Cambodia?
Yes, they said they wanted to increase the population, and when I pointed out that some of their policies may discourage it, they said that there were essentially conjugal visiting hours. A couple of, I can't remember how many days, but there's certain days of the month that men could visit their wives and vice versa. So that it was a policy, but in theory they wanted to improve it, but in practice it wasn't the kind of thing that actually did. But yes, they wanted to increase the population.
Au cours de votre voyage,
During your trip, were you able to meet with refugees presented to you as refugees of Kampuchea Krom? And if yes, do you remember when you met with them and what kinds of conversations you had with those people?
Yes, we did meet, and it was midway in our trip. And the conversations were largely the Kampuchea Krom saying that they were starving in Vietnam and they came to Cambodia for a better life.
alors j'avais noté ceci.
I had noted this and it appeared quite strange. You met with those refugees when you were going to Kampong Som, and the refugees told you that they had fled from Vietnam because the authorities there were opposed to capitalism and that they had come to Cambodia to make money. I noted that, and I don't know whether it is in line with what you remember. I found it quite strange.
Right, and I wrote it down because it was strange, and there was no follow-up, like how could you make money here when there's no money, but that's what they said.
Alors, j'aimerais maintenant.
Now, I would like us to talk about one of the high points of that trip, and that was the interview you granted to Prime Minister Pol Pot. What can you tell us about that interview for a start?
Il semble qu'il y ait un problème de traduction.
It would appear there is a translation problem. There is no interpretation into Khmer. Is there any problem with interpretation into English as well?
Non plus.
Neither. I am being told to try again. Is it working now? Yes? Very well. I would like to put questions to you regarding the interview you granted to Pol Pot. Can you tell us when that interview was conducted and how it unfolded, what subjects you broached, and so on and so forth?
We were asked several days earlier to prepare questions in advance, which we did. The subjects were all the subjects we've already mentioned, including the war, the impending war, but human rights. And Richard Dudman and I had one set of questions, and Malcolm Caldwell had another, because he was a friend and he would have a separate interview. At the same time, we were not guaranteed an interview. And on our last day, we presumed that we would not have one. And once again, I was out on a walk, which I shouldn't have been on, when the interview was granted. So one of the cadre came, fetched me, and within 30 minutes, we were driven over to what was a former French Governor General's home here, right on the river, a beautiful sort of Art Deco home. And it was a very dramatic scenario. We had a special Mercedes take us, a very fancy one that we hadn't used before. Waiting for us at the door was Tuan Prasid again, I believe. Walked into the big audience hall, and there, sitting down in this large chair, as if it were a throne, was Pol Pot himself. With him were Yang Sari and Kiet Chun. So we went over, introductions were made, he did not get up. We had a time to take photographs, sit down, have a little chat, and then we were told that he would not answer any of our questions. The answers were later given to us in writing, and that he would talk to us. So instead of an interview, it became a lecture. And for approximately 2 hours, he lectured us on the impending war with Vietnam. And it was without a note, entirely extemporaneous. He drew this incredible vision of the Vietnamese army coming across from the east, supported by Warsaw Pact tanks and armed forces. And then he said the Cambodians would stop them with the Cambodian forces and forces from NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. He imagined that NATO would then be supporting Cambodia. And you'd have the Warsaw Pact from Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, Warsaw Pact from Eastern Europe and Vietnam coming, and there'd be the big clash, and Cambodia would win. And it was so bizarre that Richard and I were looking at each other's notes to make sure we heard the same thing, Warsaw Pact, NATO. And then he described how this would be the biggest crisis in the world, because if Cambodia became a satellite of Vietnam, it would trigger ever larger Cold War problems. That was 2 hours. And at the end of it, he said goodbye to us, and we went back to the house. And the car dropped us off, and then the car took Malcolm Caldwell to his interview. And what Malcolm told us when he came back was that he actually had a discussion with Pol Pot. And Malcolm had already told Ieng Sary and others that he was very upset that Cambodia and Vietnam were fighting, that he had supported both of their revolutions, and it made him very sad, so that they would be fighting each other. So he did not talk about Vietnam with Pol Pot. He only talked about revolutionary economics. And I can't remember everything he said, but he came back very happy. He thought his mission was done. The one thing he cared about was understanding how a communist country could have their economic theories. And then he came back, and we thought that was the end of our trip.
Regarding that interview with Pol Pot, he explained that Pol Pot had his theory about the eventual consequences of the conflict, and I believe that he said that Vietnam was going to be supported by the Warsaw Pact forces, and Cambodia would be supported by NATO. Did he at any point in time refer to the role of China?
I don't remember that he did. I do not remember that he did.
Alors, vous avez expliqué également.
You also explained that you did not receive any answers to the questions you had prepared for Pol Pot, but you did say that he subsequently gave you answers in writing. I noted in reading one of your articles, an article I referred to earlier. I have already given the references of that document this morning. It is stated therein that you interviewed Pol Pot on 2 subjects. The first question was how it could happen that the government had given with so much assurance statistics regarding the number of births, the number of deaths. Do you remember the answer that you obtained for that question? I mean, an answer from Pol Pot.
Exactly, no.
Voilà, non. J'ai noté, moi,
I noted in reading this article, and you were quoting Pol Pot, and this is what you said, and I quote. I'm switching to English.
cooperatives send their regular reports, including figures in all fields. The central administration needs only to assemble this data. Est-ce que ça vous rafraîchit la mémoire?
Does that jog your memory?
Ok. Et dans ce même article,
And in the same article, you also write that you interviewed Pol Pot on the judicial system in place in Cambodia. And apparently, he also answered your questions regarding the existence of popular courts or tribunals. And if I quote your article, this is what Pol Pot said. I quote, "All problems can be resolved by the people. Ordinarily, the people hold regular meetings during which they engage in criticism and self-criticism exercises. They always end up resolving minor and major disputes, and the tribunals only intervene to ratify the decisions of the people, and they are guided by the principles of democratic centralism." End of quote. Do you also recall that answer?
Yes.
j'aimerais aussi que vous me disiez
I would also like you to tell us whether you interviewed the officials of Democratic Kampuchea on the organization chart of the government of Democratic Kampuchea. Did you try to find out who was in charge of what, who was minister of what ministry?
Yes. Yes.
et est-ce qu'on vous a donné ces réponses?
And did they answer that question?
I had with me, if I remember correctly, the chart that the U.S. government made up with all of their, with the outline. And I believe it was Persit. Oh, shoot. I think it was, my memory, but I know, I believe it was Persit who did not want to answer, but he did not say it was wrong. And it's the chart that you all have seen of, you know, standing committee, government, party.
Et semble-t-il, par exemple, vous avez demandé
And it would appear that you asked who was the vice president of the state presidium, and it appears that that question was not answered.
I guess not.
Voilà. Par contre,
You nevertheless stated during your visit to the rubber plantation that you were given a name, the name of Van Arit. Does that name ring a bell to you?
The name for what? For the number 2?
non, alors,
No, perhaps I should start by refreshing your memory. At the time of your visit to the rubber factory, you were given the name of Van Narit and told that that rubber factory was directly under the auspices of the Minister of Commerce, or the person in charge of the Department of Commerce, and you were given the name Van Narit. Does that ring a bell?
Vaguely.
Bien, j'avais promis de ne pas dépasser 20
Very well. I had promised not to go beyond 20 minutes. I have already gone beyond 20 minutes. So please tell me very quickly, what was the last high point of your visit? And the last night you spent in Phnom Penh, that is the night of the death of Caldwell. What do you have to say regarding that?
Well, we had all gone to bed and packed our bags and were ready to leave when I was woke, and I'll just give my version, I won't talk about the others. I was woken up by noise that I didn't recognize until I smelled the cordite, and I realized that I'd been woken by gunshot. And I got out of bed and went. I was on the first floor. The men were on the second floor. And ran into, literally, a young man with bandoliers crossed. And he pointed his gun at me. And I had heard some mumbling in Khmer and some moaning and groaning. And he clearly looked Cambodian, but he had on a strange cap. And he pointed the gun, and I screamed at him, first in English and then in Khmer, no. And I ran into my room and ran into the bathtub, which is what you learn when you're a war correspondent. That's the only place you can be safe. And that happened to be under the stairwell. He did not follow me, and I heard him go up the stairs, and then I heard lots of gunshots. Then I heard him run away. And then there was quiet. This for several hours, I believe. And I did not hear anybody upstairs. I didn't hear anything outside. And at first, I thought this was the invasion and they came to the wrong house. Then I wondered if there was a coup. Then I wondered if there was an uprising. And then I just stopped thinking. And then after a while, I heard sounded like, glass breaking on our front door. Someone coming in, dragging something up the stairs, down the stairs, I can't remember which. And then another door shutting. Then I heard commands in Khmer as people were running around the house, just numbers, Moipi Bai. And then one of the guards came into the bedroom, and I recognized him, and I presumed he was there to help me. So I was glad to see him. And he said to stay, don't stay in your bedroom. He turned on all the lights, but he told me to stay in the bedroom. And then he was gone for a while. And I asked in Khmer if everybody's okay, and he said, yes, everybody's fine, but you stay in your room. And then within the hour, Prasit came into the bedroom and said that Richard Dudman was fine, but that they had killed Malcolm Caldwell, that Malcolm Caldwell had been killed, and please pack up everything and leave the house. I asked what was going on in the city, why, is the whole city up? No, it's just you, and you have to get out of the house. So we were driven somewhere close in on the same street in the neighborhood, where we were questioned by a high-ranking security type and left to wait for morning. Prasit came to pick us up and take us back to the house where Malcolm's body was laid out in a coffin. We had a secular kind of ceremony with Ying Sari giving a ceremony, and he blamed it all on the Vietnamese. And we were, this side of paralyzed. It was very, 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 very frightening. And I gave them a message to send to my paper and to my family to say everything was fine. And they didn't send it. We got on the airplane to Beijing, and Prasit came with us and discovered that they didn't send any of the cables. And we arrived, nothing was prepared. So we got in touch with the British and the American representative. We didn't have a full embassy then. And Mr. Woodcock was fabulous. The British ambassador was fabulous. Then we got in touch with the outside world. And at first, no one could believe this had happened. So we went home, and I think it was the day after we got home that the Vietnamese invaded.
So, with regard to the dates, it seems to me that you left and you arrived in Beijing on the 23rd of December, and apparently the Vietnamese troops started coming into Cambodia on the 25th of December. So 2 days after you left for Cambodia. So later on, did you become aware of certain documents regarding what happened that night? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Excuse me. As I said, Ying Sari wanted to blame the Vietnamese. It made no sense to us. Well, nothing makes sense about these murders, but then I think it was Ben Kiernan who got the documents from Tuol Sleng. One of the last things that they did before the Khmer Rouge had to leave was they arrested some of the stewards who had been taking care of us and accused them of a rather twisted plot to kill Malcolm. There was some insinuation that I was the better target because I was a CIA agent, but somehow there was it made no sense. But the gist of it is that it was at least one person was killed in Tuol Sleng because of accused of being Malcolm's murderer, and that it was all part of. They were Cambodians. They were not Vietnamese. So within the internal documents, the Vietnamese weren't blamed. Cambodians who'd served on us and it was part of one of their fantastic networks, CIA agent thing. So, it makes no sense why the friend would be killed and not the journalist, unless you imagine that we were saved in order to write the story.
I think that it would be difficult to know exactly what happened, who was behind what and who did what. In any case, what we know is that Dukes testified that 4 guards belonging to a unit called Y8 had been brought the following day to Tuol Sleng, and that he asked that these prisoners be kept so that they could be questioned, and he also said that these were among the last prisoners
killed before the arrival of the Vietnamese. And there were also statements made by a certain Pipun, Mr. Rochonton, alias Pipun, precisely, and other statements in that regard. So I'm a bit running out of time, so I think I'm going to stop here with my questioning. Thank you very much, Ms. Becker. Of course, I would have wanted to ask questions to you about the interviews that you made, in particular with Ms. Ying Tirit, but now I think the parties might want to put the questions to you that I could not put to you. So, and I hope that they're not going to ask the same questions over and over again. Thank you.
President, thank you, Judge Lavange. The chamber will hand the floor to the co-prosecutors to put questions to the expert, Elizabeth Becker. You have the floor now. National Co-Prosecutor, good afternoon, Mr. President, and good afternoon, Madam Expert. My name is Seng Liang. I am a National Co-Prosecutor. I have some questions for you in relation to your visit in December 1978. I will not ask you too many questions, as some of my other questions have been covered by Judge Lavange. My first question to you is the following. This morning you stated before this court that you visited Cambodia in December 1978, and there were three of you, that is yourself, Mr. Dutman, and Professor Caldwell. Could you tell the court why the Khmer Rouge chose you for the trip to Cambodia at the time?
They said they chose me because they knew me, first of all, from my writing during the war, and because I kept asking them. I would go every year to the UN and ask them, and I wrote letters to their embassy in Beijing.
And why Dutman was also chosen by the Khmer Rouge, if you know?
Richard believed he was chosen because he was well known as a Washington correspondent who wrote articles critical of the American war in Vietnam and Cambodia. He had already visited post-war Vietnam, and he was very near retirement and very much wanted to visit post-war Cambodia.
And what about Professor Caldwell? You already stated that you met him in Beijing. Before your encounter with him there, had you known him before, prior to that?
I did not know him, but I knew his book about Cambodia that he wrote with Le Cortan. So I knew him by reputation only.
Thank you. And amongst the three of you, did any of you speak or understand Khmer language?
I used to speak, and so I still could then, and so I understood a bit. Neither Malcolm Richard Dudman spoke either Khmer or French.
តើលោកស្រីចេះនិយាយខ្មែរ
And with your limited Khmer language, could you actually make a conversation in Khmer?
Well, no, not a real conversation, but I was able to get a couple things known, but no, I depended always on interpreters.
តើនៅសម័យនោះ
President, National Co-Prosecutor, please leave a sufficient pause so that the interpreter can provide a proper interpretation. Thank you. Council, thank you, Mr. President. Why at that time you didn't bring along any interpreter to assist you?
I would have loved to. It was not allowed. I couldn't bring a photographer. I could not bring an interpreter. I was lucky to get the visa for myself.
នៅក្នុងដំណើរទស្សនកិច្ចរបស់អ្នកស្រីទាំងមូលតើ
During your entire trip, who was actually responsible in providing you with the interpretation to you and to your team?
It was always Tun Prasit.
អរគុណលោកស្រីលោកស្រីអាចបញ្ជាក់ប្រាប់បន្តិចទៀតបានទេថាតើ
President interrupts. Mr. National Co-Prosecutor, you've been reminded that twice already. Please leave sufficient pause between question and answer session. National Co-Prosecutor. Could you tell the court what was your main purpose of visiting Cambodia at the time? What did you actually want to see?
It was no one had been to, no journalist had been to Democratic Kampuchea. I had every question everybody had. What was really going on? It was a closed-off society. There was no communication, no cables, no telephone, nothing. It's self-isolation. So it was a big question, what's really going on in Democratic Kampuchea? And everybody was very afraid. So I went there because I cared about what was going on.
ចឹងក្នុងឋានៈលោកស្រីជាអ្នកកសែតតើនៅពេលនោះតើលោកស្រីបានមើលឃើញនៅអ្វីដែលលោកស្រីចង់ឃើញដែរឬទេ
As a journalist, did you actually see what you wanted to see?
Well, no, but I saw enough to get the beginning of an idea. But yes, it was very important to go and to see. But no, of course not. That's what I said. It was it was the equivalent of being under house arrest. So no, I didn't see everything I wanted to see.
This morning, you actually read a report provided to you by Judge Lavange, and that is in relation to a report submitted to the upper echelon on the request of your visit. And besides what was mentioned in that report or request, did you actually visit a hospital or a healthcare center?
We went to a medical factory, and I snuck into a hospital with I think it's the old Chinese hospital, and saw some soldiers there who were wounded, and I think along with there was a small clinic to go with the pharmaceutical factory. But no, we didn't. Other than that, no.
Thank you. I'd like now to ask you a question or two in relation to violations of human rights. Throughout your visit, did you meet or talk to or interview people or groups of people who were reported to be victimized?
No.
President and National Co-Prosecutor, please switch off your microphone after you finish your question. This morning, in your response to Judge Lavange, you stated that you visited a cooperative in Kampong Cham and that you met a man whom you considered a former Phnom Penh resident. And you interviewed that man. What was your opinion on that particular man? Was he arranged for the purpose of your interview, or was it a coincidence?
It was definitely arranged. It was not a coincidence.
I'd like to refer to your trip to an institution which was run by Chun Mom, the brother of Chun Prasit. And allow me to have a quote. It's E3/20, Khmer EIN is 00232539 to 40, and in English 00238120. That is page 407. And the French EIN is 00638659. That is page 399. You stated that in those classrooms as well as on televisions, they were similar to the boys who were considered rough. And then on the next page, you refer to an English author that is from Dickinson, and that they were of a similar age, that is 7 to 8 years old. And that their performance was amounted to a child labor. And in the Khmer translation of your book, what you described was similar to what was described in Dickensian The Wife. Could you elaborate a little bit further on this wording, the word wives?
What was the last word? Web? I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
The word that you use is Dickensian wives, and let me spell it: Dickensian and WAIFS.
Sorry, I didn't understand. Waif is a little child. And Dickensian, of course, is Charles Dickens. And Charles Dickens wrote those heartbreaking sagas, newspaper serials, about the poor treatment of children in the industrialization of England. And it's, you know, as someone who grew up in the English-speaking world, when you see young kids like that, the waifs, you immediately think of Charles Dickens because his work helped change the labor laws. And so it's an automatic thing that you see these poor kids working instead of going to school or something, and you think of Charles Dickens.
Thank you. And during your visit to Cambodia, did you have a chance to interview ordinary people besides the Khmer Rouge cadres?
The interviews were all arranged by the Khmer Rouge. So even when someone was presented to me as a normal person, I doubted that they were normal people. So nothing was me going out and saying, "Hi, I'd like to talk to you." That was forbidden. Whoever I was able to talk to was given to me.
How about the low-level cadres? How many of them were you allowed to speak to or to interview?
I would say dozens, but interview might be too grand a word. I was able to have a few conversations until many of them were cut off.
And in your capacity as an experienced journalist, and that you interviewed several or many interviewees, what did you notice in terms of the manner or the expression of the people, the cadres or the low-level cadres whom you spoke to? Were they of their own free will during the time that that you interviewed them?
No. In fact, what helped me exactly in this issue was the fact that I used to live here. And there was no question that these were not normal reactions of Cambodians. They were more like robots. There was a guardedness of them. They definitely had me mostly speak to men. Women, no. Very, very few. They mostly had us speak to men, and they were largely veterans, so they were cadre who they trusted. There was nothing relaxed, casual, interesting, funny. There's no expansion of moods or conversation. It was tuck, 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 tuck. Only within a very narrow band of what they wanted to ask about, and if I asked the wrong question, it was cut off.
Thank you. And now let me go through part of your visit to a cooperative in Kampong Cham. Actually, it was covered already by the judge this morning. That is in reference to the document E3/20. EN in Khmer is 002325 43244. That is page 545 to 546, and English is 00238124, page 411, and French ERN is 0063 8661 through 62, page 401 to 402. And I refer to your book, Wonderful Verse Over, and I'd like to make a direct quote here. Quote, "We passed a newly constructed concrete granary. Later, more children with skinny limbs and extended bellies appeared. Then we saw a single village scene from our car, and those people seems to be fed well." End of quote. Comparing the children with skinny limbs and extended bellies through the scenery where people looked well fed, what reflection had you got about these sceneries, the two contrasting sceneries that you saw?
I presumed that I was seeing the difference between what was generally called old people and new people. That there was something resembling a caste system there, and the people who were trusted, the old people of the revolution, were cared for better and fed better.
Thank you. And also my next question is in regards to your visit to Kampong Cham Cooperative. That is in reference to your book, document E3/20. Khmer is 00232547. And EN in English is 00288127, page 414, and the French ERN is 00638664, that is page 404. And I'd like to make the following quote. Quote, "Prasad told us to be kind and announced that we were off to rubber plantation cooperative. And then our first agricultural cooperative, Phom Preh Mir." End of quote. And also to the lower part of the page, and let me quote, "We returned back into the car and we were off to the cooperatives." And for the Khmer translation, it was just a cooperative, but in the English text, it reads that we were off to the cooperative Potemkin village. That is Potemkin. Can you elaborate a little bit further on this term that you use, that is the Potemkin?
Potemkin is referring to early Soviet Union, and visitors were shown a village called Potemkin, and it's now a term for a model village that looks really great, that hides the grim reality behind it. So Potemkin, in just everyday language, means a splendid model that hides what is a gruesome reality. So it's a Russian it's from a Russian village name, but it's the 20th century term.
Thank you. Also on the issue of this cooperative visit, I'd like to make another quote from your book. That is E3/20, and year in Khmer is 00232548, page 550, and English is at 00238127, page 415, and French is at 00638664, that is page 404, and I quote, "Village leader told us that there was a house, wooden huts on stilts, and they had 3 holidays a month on the 10th, 20th, and 30th. And the cooperative showed us women weaving cloth, men repairing implements, and a large canteen where all shares their meals." The leader emphasized that he and the other cadres were providing service to the people, and that they were selected by the masses as leaders because of their qualification to manage the village. Later on, I discovered that they were actually senior leaders of the party. End of quote. Could you please tell the court, how could you discover that they were leaders within the party, or the top party officials they were?
Let's see, how did I find that out? It was when I came back in the 80s to complete my my research. I believe I cross-checked with party documents. There's probably a footnote in there in my book. But yes, I interviewed Cambodians, who were still in Cambodia, who were, it could have been one of the intellectuals who were in the camps. But I did some cross-referencing with documents and people who were there and told me that they knew it. And then I double-checked it with a couple of the researchers, so that's how. It was afterwards in the 80s when I came back on several trips here. Cambodia, yeah.
Thank you. And did you believe that people during the Khmer Rules had the freedom to choose their leader as mentioned by the chief?
Oh, absolutely not. This is part of that phrase Potemkin. This is all fantasy. This is made up. So they tell me these things, but, I didn't believe them. No, there was no reason to believe them.
Thank you. And during your trip from Kampong Thom to Siem Reap, that is in your book, E3/20, and Khmer is at 00232549, that is page 551 to 52. And the EN in English is 00238129. That is page 416, and the French EN is 00638666, page 406. And let me quote, "We drove to Siem Reap from the cooperative. Siem Reap is a large town adjacent to Angkor, home of Cambodia's famous temple complex. Along the way, we lunched at Kampong Thom at a new houseboat on the Great Lake. And then, on the highway, Our car stopped spontaneously to see from a distance a group of peasants working a field and singing revolutionary songs under a flapping red flag. That man and I took photographs. Caldwell, the sympathetic friend, was the only experienced tourist. In the communist countries, and by far the greater cynic, he preferred to stay in the car and laugh at the clumsy photo opportunity prepared for us. End of quote. Please explain to the court what you wrote in that book.
What I was saying was that they stopped the car to say, "Oh, look at this. Isn't this interesting?" But it wasn't spontaneous. It was a mise en scene. It was set up for us so we could believe that peasants just love to sing while they work with this flag flying. But this is all made up. It was Fantasyland. They made it up so we would think that way. It was a production for us only. It was not real life.
Thank you. And now I move on to part of your book on your trip to Battambang. And in your book you said that you argued a lot with the Praset because you were not allowed to visit the northwest zone. Khmer Ian is 00232552. That is page 554, and the English is at 00238131. That is page 418. And the French is at 00638667-268. That is page 407 to 408. And allow me to quote. It went on like that. I brought up Ieng Sari's pledge that we could visit Northwestern Cooperative, especially to refute the charges of massive human rights violations against the former residents of Phnom Penh. But there was nothing to be gained finally. Praset was the bureaucrat charged with lying to us. And he had no choice but to enlarge those lies the more he was oppressed. End of quote. Did you know why they changed their mind and not allowed you to visit the cooperative in Battambang?
He made up a reason, but I didn't think it was true. I don't know that they ever planned to. I doubt that they planned to. One of the things that happened was we would spend long days on the highway, and then we'd have 30 minutes to see something very quickly, and then long hours driving around. So it was a process of spending a lot of time by ourselves in this car and then showing up for very little reporting time. So it was a way to stalling us.
Persecution. Did you know that when Praset told you a lie?
Well, yes, because one, he had a horrible twitch, and it got very bad when he lied. Two, he always dropped his head. And but then generally it's because he kept contradicting himself. That's what I meant, that it got larger and larger. First it was this reason, then it was that reason. But, I never got a straight answer.
Prosecutor, was he himself intended to lie, or was he instructed to lie you?
As I wrote, he was the person in charge of explaining Cambodia to us. So I believe he was told the kind of Cambodia, what image they wanted us to see of democratic Kampuchea. This was not his, he was instructed, yes.
Prosecutor, thank you, Madam Baker. Now I would like you to give clarification that you respond to Judge Lavoine this morning as regards your conversation with Mr. Ieng Seri during dinner reception, and your response to the question, your question on human rights. And Ieng Seri said that there was no human rights problem in Cambodia, and justice was given, said that there was no prison in the country. Justice was administered through the cooperative by the people, and that was the end of such issue. Could you explain what you wrote, or what was it, the People's Court?
I never saw one. He told us this. We never saw one. So there was never any proof that there existed such a people's court.
Question: did you ask anything as to whether a solution toward the opposer of the Khmer Rouge regime, or anyone react or refuse to the regime? Did you ask any question as regard this matter?
You mean how they treated people who opposed them?
Prosecutor, I would like you to elaborate as to whether did you ask further question the Khmer Rouge regime how would the Khmer Rouge treat the people who has opposed or have the opposing opinion against the regime?
Yes, on almost all of the spots, I tried in many different ways to ask that question, because the human rights question always, and they always cut me off and said that this was not a problem. As I said this morning, they considered that proof that I was either bourgeois or a CIA agent. This is not they said it's not a problem, and they stopped the questioning. They tended to stop me from asking the question.
Prosecutor, thank you. Did you insist to visit to the prison or any security centers during your trip, your visit?
They denied that there were prisons.
Prosecutor, thank you. Now I would like to move on to another question before I conclude this. As regard the trip to Takao, when you visited a cooperative at Liebo as a model cooperative of the regime, how do you know it was a cooperative, a model cooperative, or someone told you about that?
This is the cooperative where they took all the delegations, and compared to everything else we saw, this was a model. So there, if you saw this compared to the others, there's no question you would say that this was a model.
Prosecutor, on the same page, document your book E3/20, ERN in Khmer 00232557, page 559, English ERN at 00238135, page 422, French ERN 0063 86 71, page 411. I quote, "We were taken to one such a family dwelling and introduced to a mother and her son. He sat on the mat, the visit, dressed in a black sarong and blouse and staring at us with a worried countenance that never eased. It was one of the faces of the Yugoslav had noticed, a face that could not smile. We left the hut quickly for fear of upsetting the woman or putting her in jeopardy." My question for you is that could you explain further to the court, based on your experience in doing the interview with many people, especially Khmer refugee at the refugee camp, when you compare to the appearance of an old woman, how can you tell the court the difference between their face expression and what you saw?
Well, I took pictures of this. In fact, you can in the book you see her sitting there, very guarded. Does not want to make any emotional face. Whereas when you talk to refugees, even if they're tired and even if they've gone through a lot, after a few minutes, people respond. You develop a rapport. That was impossible. It was very impossible, and I was not the only one who felt it. We all three felt, we'll leave her alone. This is not the time to talk to her. You would pick it up. There's the definite signal not to talk.
Prosecutor, thank you very much for your effort to respond to my question. Mr. President, I have no further question. My esteemed colleague will ask further question. The President, thank you, prosecution. The trial chamber take recess until 3 o'clock. Court officer, please work with the expert support section to coordinate the expert to take a break during the court recess. The court is now in recess.